All right, so hi everyone. Welcome to our web dev workshop. This will just run for about an hour and we'll be doing a few little coding exercises along the way. We're going to cover the basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I think will be really helpful to you in the hackathon. Just a bit about me. My name is Imo or Imogen McDonald. I'm a BCS student and my previous degree was in accounting and finance. I started school BCS in 2019. And I'm one of the Wix and girlCode webmasters. And I'm also going to be a mentor there at the hackathon this weekend. So look out for me if you have any questions. I'm happy to help you out. Sandra's going to get tired of hearing this joke, but I believe that popcorn is a valid form of dinner. I I like sewing, but I'm not very good at it. And unfortunately for you, I am not a very good PowerPoint maker, so bear with me. So this is just a preview of what we're kind of working towards. If we get there, you'll be able to toggle between the home and about page as kind of a makeshift nav bar. And if you want to come to the React tutorial tomorrow, you'll learn a bit more about how to make this maybe look a bit more, let's say modern, a bit nicer. But today we're going to cover the basics and make sure you really understand the functionality of what's going on. So there is a lot to talk about when it comes to web dev. Which is hard to cover. So I'm going to focus on a few key ideas in this workshop. But generally, so web dev is, of course, making applications that you access through the browser, and things are hosted at domain names, and that's how you access them. So there are more stages than what I've listed here, but these are kind of some core stages I think you should understand. So after, running this, your idea and business planning, you'll eventually get to the development team. And developers often work with UX and UI teammates to help them create the design before they start making it. And so if you want to learn more about design and how to mock up apps, we also have a workshop running, I think on Wednesday. It's the Intro to Figma. The main thing that you're going to be doing in the hackathon is the development. And if you have time, I recommend testing, but I know a lot of people don't end up doing testing because they just run out of time. But testing is actually a really important part of development in general. And finally, deployment. So if you don't know what deployment is, it just means that you have released something that people can access from anywhere. So what we're going to be building today is something that just you can run on your own computer and have a look at what's going on. But you have to deploy something like how the girlCode app is deployed to a domain name, so then anyone can access it from anywhere that they want. So another key idea in web dev or just development in general is the idea of the difference between the front end and the back end. So this is just like a quick overview. There's a lot more to say about front end versus back end, but this just gives you a bit of an idea if you're not sure what the distinction is. So the front end, of course, is kind of the visual appearance, the UI, what you're used to looking at. So maybe what color is a button and where does it appear on a screen? It could be all of these things: layouts, navigation, animation. Sure. And then the back end can do a lot. It can be a lot of your business logic, dealing with databases, probably see more advanced algorithm work if you've ever done LeetCode. And also it looks at architecture a lot more. Now, I threw in some examples of things that kind of can be done on both sides. And it'll be up to you to do research on maybe if it's better done on the front end or the back end. But you can do things like filtering and some component logics. Like I've written code where you can either put it on the front end or the back end if a user can do a certain action. And that's something like if you're an admin user or a professor versus a student, you might see something different on the screen if you're logged into Canvas, for example. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be doing an exercise revolving is HTML, which is hypertext markup language. It's not a programming language, it's a markup language. And it's used to structure a web page and its content. So it'll look like a bunch of these little tag elements. So in this picture, you see an element which just displays text. We call it a p tag. And so it's composed of these kind of opening and closing tags and then the content in the middle. And together, it's an element. They can also have attributes. In this example, I used the style attribute, but there could be a lot of other things. There could be an ID attribute. I think for button, there's a type attribute. So this is just some terminology to help you when you're Googling and understanding what exactly are you looking at. So of course, in this case, the style attribute is making the text appear red. If I were to pop that code into the code sandbox, then my output would show the text appearing as red. So this is something that I didn't quite understand at the start, so I thought would be helpful to share. There are these two components or two elements called div and span, and they're very helpful, and they're used to contain groups of elements. So say I want one half of my page to hold a form, and I want another half of my page to list maybe like lists of items. Maybe I have products I'm trying to sell, and so there are these little cards. So to get those kind of different those different sections contained, that you can use these div or span kind of container elements. And so one thing to note about them, in my experience, depending on how you've set up your code, maybe this won't always be the case, but at the core, div is meant to be block scoped, so things will appear under each other, and span is meant to be in line, so things should appear next to each other. But if you're doing a lot of funky CSS, in my experience, sometimes that might not be the case. So when in doubt, I just use div. If you look at the girlCode website code, you'll see a lot of divs. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do some coding in Code Sandbox. So it's a great way to just try out some code. You don't need any extra IDEs, any fancy environment to run it. You'll just be able to see it running in the browser. So if Sandra could post the link one more time, you can open up a Code Sandbox. Start with a vanilla JavaScript Code Sandbox. And you'll arrive at a window that looks like this. So just an overview of what you're looking at, and then I'll stop to let you try out a few things on your own. So there is this file index.js. That's where your JavaScript, that's what the .js means. That's where your JavaScript is going to go. So for now, I'm going to get you to just delete everything but line 1. Styles.css, we're going to eventually use this file as well. This is where your styling is going to go. Index.html, this is where your HTML is going to go. And package.json, we're just going to ignore. But this, in a way, helps the Code Sandbox render what's going to be on the right-hand side here. So what you can do in here, this is kind of common syntax. So up here, this head section generally has to do with kind of what's in your tab. In this case, there's extra code in Code Sandbox kind of hiding that. So the point is just ignore the head area for now. What we're going to be doing is adding code to the body. So if I want to start adding something, it's kind of a common syntax to also have this div container as your app. So this is the whole page. So to get started, I'm going to separate them and write everything within the app container. So let's make a header to start. Now to make it render, you have to make sure you have the closing tag. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I encourage you to try a few different things. If you want to try something new, just look up how to type text in HTML or how to make a button in HTML. You can just Google that and you should get a really easy to read guide. And then I'll start showing you what to do in about a minute or two. Okay, so I'm gonna start coding and you can follow along. If anyone tried something adventurous, I'd love to know in the chat. And if you ran into any problems, maybe we can try and help you out. So I'm gonna get started. I'm gonna kind of follow that template that I was using when I showed you at the start of the presentation. So I want it to have a header title, so that's my H1 element. Now I'm just gonna make some text to go along with it. So that's most commonly displayed in a p tag. I love web dev. Make sure it renders. Awesome. And just for fun, I'm going to make the web dev bold. Nice. Okay. And this is going to be related to the JavaScript. I'm just going to type it in. When you're live coding, you make 100% more errors. Okay. And a button. We definitely need a button. Image is supposed to display an image. So you're going to actually have to have a link to an actual image to make it render something. Okay, I'm going to call my button Pick Me. Okay, and I'm just going to quickly type out stuff I'm going to need for later. Counter. Did you figure out the image? If not, I can do one. Okay, we'll come back to the image if we have time later. Okay, so we're going to move on to CSS. Okay, so obviously what we just built looks kind of ugly. Okay, we'll come back to image at the end. So to make things look better, to give them, any color at all, we need CSS, cascading style sheets. So yep, these are used to add styling. You could do tons of things and you could actually probably make the web page look pretty good with a lot of work. So things like that you can add styling to are the button size, the border radius, which makes it curved, font type, which when you type it in CSS, you want to type font family, and then you can type Arial. The color of the font, you can even do animations in CSS. So there are different ways to apply these stylings, and they're called selectors. So they can be applied in different ways. So there are three kind of different types of selectors that are really important to remember. An ID starts with this sort of hashtag symbol. So you can see the login button. And this is ideal when you maybe want to apply a style to one thing. Maybe it's a very specific thing and you want to make sure that it doesn't get, it's not sharing styles with anything else. Sometimes if you're making a lot of styling, then you can often get things confused and then you'll spend a lot of time trying to figure out which class am I actually working with. So if you want something really specific, maybe like a nav bar, an ID might be helpful to use. A class, on the other hand, starts with a period. So this is the close button. So this would be helpful if you want all your, let's say like close buttons or maybe like a checkout button if you're making an app for shopping and you want those to all be the same color, then the class is a really handy tool to make sure they all look uniform. And you can apply it so that they are applied to everything in your app. So imagine an app with like hundreds of files. This is really helpful, so you don't have to repeat your code. It's a really important thing in programming to try and avoid repeating yourself as much as possible. And finally, you can have a selector be applied to an element. So this is pretty powerful. I don't actually do this very often myself. I like to apply custom styling to things, but it looks like in the example here, there's no hashtag or period. It's just button. So that means, remember when we wrote button in the code sandbox, it's going to be applied to anything that's a button. So I've run into problems with this before where I had a button, let's say it was green, and I wanted a certain button to be red in one element. But because this selector was applied to all elements, I couldn't override that. So I had to go and do a bunch of changes. So this is very powerful, and I recommend using it with extreme caution. So you can also do some pretty easy actions based on this. My favorite one is to do it for hovering over a button. Just in general, I like using different styling for hovering just to kind of help guide user actions on a web page, so they know maybe they can click on that when they didn't realize that they could. Sometimes it's not quite obvious what you can do with a web page. So you just have to use code like this with a colon and then hover on the button. You could also do this, say there was an ID or a class selector. So if this was period, button, colon, hover, it would work the same way. So Flexbox isn't something I'm going to show you in this tutorial, but it's very, very helpful, and I've included a link there. So it will help you with alignment. So say you have a nav bar, things are going to automatically appear in the left top side of the nav bar, but maybe you want all your items to be on the right side of the nav bar. The girlCode website is an example of that. So we've used Flexbox to push things to the right. Oh, and one other thing, you might find maybe you're trying to do Flexbox and it's not working. And it's because in a sort of parent container, those div elements that I was talking about, you need this display :flex in there. And that tells the container it's a Flexbox. And then its children will start to use the Flexbox styling. All right, so we're going back to Code Sandbox. So sky's the limit with whatever you want to try. I've given you a few examples of what you can do in the slides, or you can look up how to do things. So these are just some ideas of what you could do. Again, you can do what you want. I'm going to give you, let's say, 2 minutes to experiment with styling before I get started. All right, so I'll get started showing you some styling. So one thing that Sandbox gives you for free in there is the body element. So remember we had these body tags, and that's just pretty much your entire page in the app. So if you wanted to, you could make the background color different. I don't want to make it look too hard on the eyes. Corn silk. I don't know if you can really tell the difference there. It went a bit yellow. So first, I'm going to show you kind of how to mock a nav bar. So I'm actually going to put it just above this div, kind of make it separate, because ideally I want my nav bar to take up as much space as possible at the top, and then have it separate as part of the app. So I'm going to just make a new div for that. All right. Okay, we can't see anything. Well, if we apply some styling, then we should be able to. So I'm going to use an ID. I'm going to call it just a nav bar. So remember when you're doing selectors in the CSS on the left there, have to use the hashtag navbar. Let's do, how about like a purple? I'm gonna make it dark. And then, hey, nothing's still in there. That's because there's no text. So I'm gonna do, there we go. So because the H1 is within the nav bar, that's why it's appearing, and then the color is around it. So let's just see if we can make that a little bit more, like a little bit bigger, so it's not so tight around home. So let's go height. Let's try 100 pixels and see how big that is. Oh, that's pretty big. So I'll just go with 60. And that text is kind of hard to see, so I'm going to make it a different color. So if that wasn't clear to you, the background color is different than color. And the color you would think would change the background color, but it's actually the color of the text. So I'm just going to leave it like that for now. We'll come back to making it better. Or rather, you can make yours better and I'll revisit it at the end. So what else can we do? Let's try doing something where we change all of one element just for fun. So I'm going to make all my text, all my p tags, sorry. What's not going to be too ugly? I'll do that same purple. I don't really like that background color, so I'm just going to take it out. So you can see now everything that's a p tag is purple, but the H1 tag, which is the header, is still a black color because it's a different element. So that's why not all the text is purple. And let's do something fun with the buttons. So for practice, I'm going to give all the buttons a class just so you can see what it looks like. So you write in class, that's an attribute. And I am going to call it, let's just put, I don't love the word button style. It doesn't really tell me anything about the page. So I'm going to call it home button. So now I know this button is probably on the home page. I'm going to apply it to all 3 of my buttons. And then I have to write it in the CSS file. So I'm going to call it, write down home button again, curly brackets, and give it a different color, teal, and it's dark. Let's make that font easier to see. And let's make these a different size. So I'm gonna do, let's see what 50 pixels looks like. Okay, that didn't do anything. I think because the text is making it, oh, sorry. Size is not the right property there. I meant to write width. Nice, okay, see how they're really big? So let's make them all 80 pixels. I want them all to kind of look uniform. 100. Okay, and I can give them a height, 30 pixels. Now there is kind of a different way, instead of just manually using width and height until you get it exactly how you want it to look. You can use something called margin. Oh, sorry. Reason why you're not using brackets. In the styles file or in the index.html file? Okay, I'll come back to your question. So the thing I just added there was padding. So let me just take that out quickly. So if you notice the difference, padding kind of adds an inner padding within the button so that the text is farther away from the border. Margin, if you wanted there to be a margin outside of the button, so outside of that black border, I could say 10 pixels. And see, it moves everything kind of away from the element that it's next to. All right, and one quick one, we'll do a hover action on this. So remember, with a hover, you take the existing class that you have. You don't have to keep everything in there. You can delete it and only change one thing when you hover. So let's say I only really care about changing the background color. Let's do pink and make the text black so you can read it better. So now when I hover over, I know I'm about to click the button, or I can click that button. Sometimes you see buttons disabled in an app too. So, you know, it just kind of helps guide user action. So I'm getting a question, is there a reason why you're not using brackets as the text editor? I'm not sure I understand the question. There are brackets around the CSS selectors or the styling in the selectors. Okay, if you want, we can come back to the question at the end of the workshop. So we're going to move on from here, but if you want to keep playing around with the styling, please make yours look better than mine. Mine looks horrible, but we're going to move on to the JavaScript. All right, so JavaScript is a really common language for web dev. It goes along with React, which is a workshop we're going to be doing tomorrow. It's a scripting language, and it's used to dynamically update the content on your web page. So some common things you can do with them, just like in other coding languages, are storing values and variables. Something kind of unique to JavaScript is using events. So when you click on a button, some things happen in the background, and we're going to go over that. So JavaScript, just like Java, is an object-oriented language. So you're going to see that you don't have to declare the type when you're creating your variables. Like, you know how you have to write string and then your variable name. In this case, you just have to write a different keyword, which we're going to go over. So that means it's dynamically typed. So the compiler figures it out at runtime, rather than it being strongly typed, where you yourself as a programmer have to tell it right away when you create the variable, this is a string or this is a number. So this is just kind of a quick preview to show you that it's not that different from Java, but this is the difference in typing. So there are two ways to create a variable in JavaScript. Let is so if you're going to be changing that variable as you use it. So I know maybe for some reason you're going to be renaming the name from Santa to another name, or if that name variable is always going to be Santa, then you make it a const. So let and const are your variables. There's also a variable called var, but it's generally not really used anymore. And then this is just a quick preview of what the for loop looks like. So this wouldn't print out something on your browser, like the web page that we're making Code Sandbox. It would print in your console. And we'll go over what that means in a little bit. So that's kind of more of a developer tool, so you can figure out and debug what's going on. So this is a really important thing to remember. JavaScript has a different type of equality operator. And so it does have the double equals, but that means it's kind of a loose equality. So these are the three cases. So a loose equality just generally checks if it's the same, and it understands that the string as the number 1 equal to an actual number. It'll sense that those are equal. But generally, we want to use the strict equality to evaluate if something is actually the same. So the main takeaway there is use the triple equality as much as you can, and only use the double equality if you really know what you're doing. So JavaScript events are going to help us work with the buttons. And we'll do a couple exercises on a couple different ways you can use events to help you out. But pretty much, you're going to be putting a function. We're going to be writing this function print hello. And this will be an event that's called when you click on the button. This is just kind of a preview of what it looks like. And I included a link there for a bit more of a tutorial. So the other thing to remember about events is that they have this read-only property called target. And so it's something that you kind of get for free when you do an event. And so in this case, we have an HTML button. It has, when you click on it, it runs this function called handle click. And then just for fun, I wrote in this value cheese. And so when you run that function and you put in this parameter called event, then we're going to be getting the value of the target, which is cheese. So that might seem a bit abstract. It's really helpful as you're making applications because maybe this button will have something to do. You'll be getting something from it. Like maybe you'll be adding an item. And so that's where it's going to be really important to know what the value is, because maybe that button generates an item that you put on your site. So more on that in a little bit. Let's see where we are. Okay, we're at the exercise again. So I'm just going to give you 1 minute to give these a try. These are a bit more complicated, so we'll go through these together. But I'm going to give you 1 minute. If you feel like you can get through all these tasks, go ahead and try and finish the nav bar where you can toggle between 2 pages. And just a reminder that you're writing JavaScript in the index.js file. Okay, so I'm going to get started with the JavaScript. So the first one we're going to start is when you hit this click me button, I just want it to display hello below. So this is a step that probably would have been the hardest part. So to make this index.js file kind of link to the index.html file, we have to tell it that it's listening for an event. And so JavaScript has this variable called document. It's a global variable that you get for free. And it's just pretty much this kind of HTML on the left. So it's the document that you're seeing in the browser. So we're going to go document, get element. And you can see Code Sandbox is suggesting things to me, pretty common things. We're going to go get element by, you could do a couple different things. Tag name, I think that would be the p tag. I think get element by ID is pretty common, so I'm going to go with that. And I'm going to be looking for the hello button. Now you may have noticed I haven't actually put that ID in our HTML yet, so I'm going to link it in now. So I'm going to just make the element. Oh, no, I need to put it in the button. So the button ID is going to be called the hello button. I'm using ID because I want it to be different than the home button, or sorry, the increment button, because they're going to do different things. So I'm going to give it the ID hello button, get element by ID. These things can now be linked. And then we're going to do something called add event listener. So this is just listening for events like clicks, but I have to tell it that it's a click. And I'm going to call my function print hello. So right now, Code Sandbox is yelling at me because I haven't actually written that function yet. So let's do that. So to make a function, I don't have to say the type, I just say, or the return type. So I just say function, print hello, the name of the function. It's not going to take any parameters. And I'm going to tell it to make a new document, or to, sorry, edit an existing document in my HTML file. And that element is going to be called hello. So I'm just going to make that right below my button, P, and I'm going to give it the ID that it's looking for, hello. And to finish off this JavaScript, I'm going to write inner equals hello, which is a string. So I'm telling it print hello. That's basically what this line is doing. So let's give it a try. Hello. And if you missed any steps there, I'll be providing this answer key shortly at the end of the workshop. So we're going to move on to the next button. That's where we're at right now. So now we're going to implement the button counter. So before I start dealing with the HTML elements, I'm just going to declare a variable. I just want it to be a number, so I'm going to call the variable count and initialize it to 0, because that would make sense. We're just going to be incrementing from 0. And now I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm just going to copy my code that I used above and kind of edit it a bit faster that way. But this is going to be, again, implementing the button. So let's call it increment button. Same thing, it's going to be listening for a click event. And let's call it increment count. Okay, got the red squiggly line again because we haven't implemented the function. So let's make the function increment count. Hey, it recognizes that I'm about to make this function, so it suggests it to me. So I'll take the help I can get. No parameters in the function, and we're going to just increment the count. So count plus plus. This is the same thing as writing count equals count plus 1. It's just kind of a short form. I'm going to comment that out, but they both mean the same thing. And again, like before, I need to make something that's going to print the count, new element. So document get element by ID. Let's call it counter. No, let's call it count total. I think it makes sense. And this, we don't want it to print a string. We want it to print the value that we've just incremented. That's the count. Right. So last thing we need to do. They can scream at me because I don't have that element in my HTML yet. So let's put the counter just above the button counter text. So another tag. Oops. And let's give it an ID. And then what did I call it? I called it count total. See what my error is. Oh, because I don't have the increment button ID in my button, right? It doesn't know what it's talking to. So increment button, I'm just going to copy that. And where's my button for increment? Right. See, I need to give it an ID so it knows what to look for. Okay, so I've solved my issues with the code. And when I click increment, there's my count. Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat. If you have questions, maybe give a shout out to Sandra. She can probably help you out. And we're going to finally move on to the last button. So this is that event target value that I was telling you about. We're just going to kind of practice what that would look like. So I'm going to start in the HTML just so you have a better idea of what the value is. So for this last one, I want to practice getting the value of the button. So I'm just going to call my value watermelon. All right, so now we're going to write the JavaScript and hopefully see the value watermelon printed below that button. So let's just reuse some of the code that I've already written. I'm just going to copy and let's call it print button value because that's what it's going to be doing. We'll come back to this in a sec. I'll just update the function. And let's call this button something different. Watermelon button. Why not? Let's make sure we put that ID in the HTML this time. I'm going to give it an ID. Compile is happy. And finally, we need to make sure the function does the right thing. And so I'm just going to make sure it prints the event value. So in this case, remember when we're working with the event, we need to make sure we pass it in as a parameter. I'll get to your question in just a sec. So I'm going to type event as the parameter to this function, and I'm going to make sure it outputs that. So I want to write event.target.value. If you just write event.value, it's not going to work. This is just kind of common syntax in JavaScript. Sometimes people, I believe, just work with the event.target. But in this case, we're going to practice getting the value. And finally, I need to make sure I put an ID for what I'm going to be printing the event.target.value to. So let's call it watermelon text. And let's put it below the button. So P, give it the ID. Oops. Okay, let's see if it worked. Watermelon. So if I change this, let's call it pineapple. This should print pineapple. Yay. So there's definitely a lot more complex things you can do with the event.target.value. We just wanted to give you kind of a key understanding of what it means to use it. Okay, someone found the answer to the question. Okay, so if there aren't any questions that people would want to ask, we'll do the nav bar and then we'll get to the image. So to do the nav bar, we're going to be toggling between two different pages. So we need to make another .html file. So in this, this source folder is just containing the index.js and styles.css. So I just want it to be in kind of the root folder, the folder you kind of land in. So I'm going to go File. I'm going to call it about.html. And yeah, that's where I want it to appear. I don't want it to appear in the source folder for now. And let's go to the HTML file. I'm just going to copy everything that I have to make it a bit easier. Oh, sorry, we need to implement the nav bar. So in HTML, you want to use this nav tag just to make sure it understands it's a navigation. I'm going to put my text within that. Okay, and let's put a different page in there. We made an about page, so we'll give it the same H1 sizing so they look uniform. Why do they appear next to each other? Okay. And now these are just kind of static text. We want to change these into links. So I'm actually going to forget about the H1 title for now. And I'm going to change them to this A tag, which is HTML's way of doing a link. So A needs this property called href, and that just leads you to where you're going to be going. So index.html is going to be my home page. /A. Oh, that's kind of hard to see. Hey? And then I'll add in one more for the about page. Okay, and those are kind of hard to see, so I'm going to give them a quick class. Nav item. Go back to our handy dandy CSS. And its class, it starts with the period, nav button. And let's do color so you can easily see it. So I think for an A tag, you have to do something like this. Text decoration, none. Okay, let's try it as an A. There we go. Okay, that fixed it. Okay, I'm gonna leave it like that. So you can see, we can probably click on them. We haven't implemented yet, so you'll get an error when you try and do anything. Let's go and finish up our about.html. So right now it's just blank, so it needs some code in it so you can see a page. So I'm just gonna copy this entire index.html, throw it in my about page, and I'm just going to delete all this stuff. So now this should just have the title about. So when I click on about, it does it not like that? Okay. So right now I don't have this hello button in this about page, but it expects it. So I'm just going to delete the JavaScript for now with this line down here. And now it should work. Oop. Right. Okay. I think because it needs the styling. All right. I solved this issue in my answer key, so I'm going to be sending out that so you can have a look. We're going to move on to just one last thing. So I wanted to tell you just a little bit about debugging, and then I'm going to end the recording, but stick around for a few more minutes, and I'll show whoever's interested how to do the image. So debugging is going to be a big part of your coding. So I'm going to show you a few different ways to do it with kind of the final version of the tutorial or of the workshop project that we were working on. And so there are a few different ways to do this. You can read console errors in your IDE. You can view it in your browser. If you want to understand what's going on, you can use these print statements, console.log, and that'll print stuff. So just you as a developer can see it in the console. It won't appear on your web page. And then if you haven't heard of Stack Overflow, it'll have the answer to almost anything you're trying to do. So just try Googling a lot of your problems, button event doesn't work on click or something. There's tons of resources out there to check out. So I'm going to open up VS Code. So if you have never looked at VS Code before, I've got a slightly different structure to my project here. I set it up just so I could run it in VS Code. It's a bit different than Code Sandbox. So that's why the folder structure is different. And then it has this thing called a terminal in the bottom area. And this just allows me to use Git to, share this code, manipulate it, save it. We did a Git workshop yesterday. If you have Git questions, please let us know. But I'm just going to hit this go live button just to show you what it looks like. Yeah, so this means it's running locally. You can see the URL. This isn't something that you would usually see, but this is my project live. And so sometimes when you're running projects like in React, you'll have errors in this console, terminal console in VS Code, but I'm going to show you how to do it in the browser. So if you right click in your browser, click inspect, and hit this tab console, you can see maybe there's something in here that's not quite working. We'll ignore the 404 error right now, but this is just generally a good source of finding your errors when you're debugging in your web apps. And so I'm going to try clicking on these buttons and nothing's happening. But we know when we did the workshop that something should be happening. So if I look at this error down here, this one's telling me that it seems like it's something to do with this index.js file. And so, I see. So when I copied my code in from Code Sandbox, I had this source folder, but in my project folder set up, I don't have that source folder anymore. So let me just try deleting that. Okay, here's my other problem. I called it app.js. And what I was trying to import is index.js. So let's see if that solved it. Look, now my errors are gone in the console, those red lines. And great.